Welcome to the Italian Renaissance podcast, where we discuss the culture and art of 15th and 16th century Italy. I'm your host, Lawrence Gianangeli. Andiamo avanti. Renaissance people, welcome back to the Italian Renaissance podcast, where today we are turning the page to continue with our next major court of the Italian Renaissance, and that is the court of the Gonzaga family in Mantua. When we look at Renaissance Mantua geographically, it falls under what are generally called the northern courts, like Ferrara. Mantua is in a prime central location, bumping up against the territories of Milan, the Republic of Venice, and the Duchy of Ferrara. Mantua is located in the Lombardy region of northern Italy, and it's strategically positioned between the Po and the Mincio rivers. The Po, which is the longest river in Italy. This city developed on low-lying lands surrounded by artificial lakes, which were created in the 12th century as a strategy to strengthen the defensive position of Mantua, which is giving the city a distinctive island-like form in between the rivers and the artificial lakes. It's not an island, but it's like one. This geography makes Mantua both easily defendable and a natural crossroad of trade routes linking Venice, Milan, and the region of Emilia-Romagna, which includes Ferrara and Bologna. So that's also including fertile surroundings, plains, supporting agriculture, while the proximity to the major waterways fostered commerce and communication between the other powers in northern Italy. Mantua's setting at once is secure, it's prosperous, it's very well connected, and that helps sustain its rise as a powerful Renaissance court under the Gonzaga family. Gonzaga power was solidified in the Middle Ages, the family carefully playing feudal politics to climb the social ladder. Their official status came from an alliance with the Holy Roman Empire, which bestowed the title of Marquis upon one named Gianfrancesco Gonzaga in 1433, and that was by Emperor Sigismund of Luxembourg, and it was his first year as emperor that he bestowed the title upon Gianfrancesco Gonzaga. So, like Ferrara, we see the northern courts solidifying as mostly independent strongholds of wealth and power in the early 1400s, but that's backed by either the powers of the emperor or the powers of the pope. This Gianfrancesco Gonzaga is the probable patron of Pisanello, who we discussed in regard to the Ferrara court in the previous episodes, and his sojourn to Mantua, where he was one of the early artists for the Gonzaga. Gianfrancesco commissions Pisanello to paint in Mantua. But today, I want us to focus not on the patronage of Gianfrancesco, but of his son and heir, Ludovico Gonzaga, the second Marquis of Mantua, beginning in 1444. So we're in the middle of the Quattrocento, guys. Keep in mind, everyone, this is the height of Medici power in Florence under Cosimo de' Medici, and this is the period of Leonello d'Este in Ferrara, and then it'll go beyond Leonello's period, right? Ludovico was born in 1412, so in the early part of the 15th century. His reign as Marquis lasts from 1444 to 1478. So that's over 30 years of political influence in the northern courts. As early as 1433, Ludovico married Barbara of Brandenburg, that is the great niece of the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund, an exceptional political alliance for the small power that was Mantua at the time. Now, Barbara, who we'll see in the frescoes we're going to talk about today, was only 10 years old in 1433 when they were wed, but was given a premier humanist education in Mantua, which she would later use as an exceptional stateswoman and regent in Mantua when Ludovico was away. Not to mention playing a pivotal role in the Church Congress of 1459, the turning point of Gonzaga prestige in the northern courts, when Mantua hosted Pope Pius II and his cohort. What was the Church Congress of 1459? It was designed to bring the armed forces of the Christian world together in a new crusade called against the Ottoman Turks, who had conquered Constantinople in 1453. Ludovico certainly earned himself a reputation as a learned humanist, but Mantua, the city itself, fell below the expectations of the visiting courtiers, prompting Ludovico to begin renovations of the city, which included improved infrastructure, new building plans, and the revived all'antica style, looking to classical architecture. Take a wild guess who was at the center of this renovation with Ludovico Leon Battista Alberti, who was one of the chief architects who helped Ludovico, ultimately producing the Renaissance masterpiece of Sant'Andrea in Mantua, a church that resembles a mix of the Pantheon in Rome with ancient Roman triumphal arches slapped onto the front of a Roman basilica plan church. Not the subject of our podcast today, but understanding that Alberti was at the center of architectural innovation in Mantua as it began to rise in prominence and prestige. So we have Ludovico married to the niece of the Holy Roman Emperor, hosting the Pope in Mantua in 1459. Things are turning around for the Gonzaga family. So, with Ludovico aiming to bring his court in Mantua to the level of cultural magnificence that defined Renaissance aristocracy, he needed to bring to Mantua an artist with the skills and vision to enhance Gonzaga prestige. So, he offered a contract to one Andrea Mantegna, which included an abnormally high sum of money. So let's talk about Mantegna, because we're going to bring this all together, guys. Mantegna was born in 1431 near Padua, so he's a bit younger than Ludovico, in a town called Isola di Tarturo, which was part of the Venetian domain, but near Padua. So it gets a lot of the influence of art movements in Padua. So from an early age, Mantegna was immersed in art. He apprenticed to Francesco Squaricione, a Paduan painter, his teacher, and a collector who had a passion for all things classical. This is a story we've probably heard before because it seems to be a common origin story among the Renaissance artists. They have a master who has inclinations towards classical style, and they learn in their studios. Squaricione's studio offered to Mantegna a close-up study of actual antique fragments, plaster cast, and sketches of Roman ruins. And Mantegna soaked all of this in. He's going to have a very highly classicizing style. He was ambitious, he was strong-willed, and so he actually breaks away from Squaricione at the age of 17. He's ready to go on his own. By his early 20s, he's already made a name for himself with the frescoes in the Church of the Eremitani in Padua. These paintings were destroyed in the Second World War, but we do have photographs of them, and their style was captivating to the audience at the time. These are figures that looked sort of carved from stone, dramatic perspective that pulled viewers right into the scene, deep sense of classical grandeur that he learned from Squaricione's studio as an apprentice. Around this time in 1453, Mantegna also married Nicolosia Bellini, that is the daughter of Jacopo Bellini, meaning the sister of Giovanni and Gentile Bellini, with Jacopo, Giovanni, and Gentile being the leading painting workshop in the whole of the Republic of Venice. So the match links Mantegna to one of the most important artistic families in Italy at this time, though Mantegna's hard-edged Paduan influence always stands apart from the softer, more atmospheric, color-based Venetian approach to painting. His growing fame soon reached Mantua, where we see Marquis Ludovico Gonzaga working to transform his court into a beacon of Renaissance culture. In 1460, Mantegna accepted Ludovico's offer to become his court painter, a role that would define the rest of his career and forever tie his name to the Gonzaga legacy, as he would spend the majority of his career as a painter of the Gonzaga court, working not only for Ludovico Gonzaga, but his heirs and Isabella d'Este through the first years of the 1500s. So this is a very long tenure as court artist for Andrea Mantegna, spanning generations of Gonzaga aristocracy. So now, with these two giants of the Renaissance united, Ludovico Gonzaga, Andrea Mantegna, we can now turn to the works which were produced by this union, one of the most important works of court art in the entirety of the Renaissance. Guys, we're about to talk about a superstar here, the Camera degli Sposi, which is also known as the Camera Picta. So, Camera degli Sposi, the room of the betrothed, or the Camera Picta, the painted room, which is the most generic, I suppose, way you can refer to this work. This is a small square room inside of the Gonzaga castle known as the Castello di San Giorgio in Mantua. The room would have been both the bedroom and an audience hall, which was a common practice in the Renaissance, thus allowing us to understand that these frescoes are essential in grasping the Gonzaga sense of political self-fashioning and representation to the powers of Europe at the time, those who would come through and be part of this audience. In terms of medium, we're talking traditional fresco style, but of course, that tradition is laden with Mantegna's innovation, which do change the way art is produced in Italy because he was highly influential. The work is dated on the fresco. He indicates that it was started in 1465. It's likely finished by about 1475, still during Ludovico's long reign. So about 10 years to finish the work. Definitely signed and dated as starting 1465. Okay, the most famous part of the fresco is the north wall, which is an area above the main fireplace in the room, the hearth of the room, which shows portraits of the Gonzaga court. Very different from that sculptural quality that you got in those church frescoes in Padua. Now we're talking about soft modeling, soft shading, and likeness. Let's look at this. I'm going to pull this image up because it's got a lot of people. It's a very, very traditional, classic Renaissance court. They are in court dress. You have the men with the tights with the different colored legs, different colored legs. The fabric is different color. It's red on one side and white on the other. In the very foreground, you have Ludovico Gonzaga himself. We know what he looks like. This is a portrait of him, and he is receiving a letter and addressing the deliverer who's removed his hat in reverence to Lord Ludovico and wears it at his side. And Ludovico looks back to him sort of stoic, but sort of concerned. What does this letter say? He's holding it in his hand. He's addressing the courier. What does the letter say? Well, we actually don't know. However, some scholarship has identified the letter as being a very specific letter from 1461, which is still in the archives today, that is informing Ludovico of an illness of Francesco Sforza, Duke of Milan, which means the possible calling in of Gonzaga's military aid. Ludovico is not only a marquis, he was what is called a condottiere, that is a leader of a military force, so to speak, kind of like not really a mercenary, but something of the sort. He's a condottiere, and it's like his favor is being called in by the Duke of Milan. That is one interpretation of what's happening here. It could be just a scene showing Ludovico as a central axis of power as he's being given some news, and he is sort of generically responding to it from his seat, which is like a throne, indicating his power in the courts of northern Italy rather than being a specific episode. Who knows? And all of this is sort of highlighted by this highly ornate curtain, which is being drawn back above Ludovico's head, forming a very strong diagonal, which leads you right to focus on Ludovico, but it's telling you that you're being given a glimpse into the private affairs of this great lord of Mantua. The curtain has been pulled back from you, for you. And who do we see? Not only do we see Ludovico, but we see, I told you we would talk about here, the Marchese Barbara of Brandenburg, that relative of the Holy Roman Emperor, who sits directly in the middle and observes the exchange as if she is taking in what is being exchanged between the two men and calculating its significance. Between her and her husband Ludovico, you have Ludovic, hold on. Ludovicino, little Ludovico with his little red hat, and their daughter Paola. These are the youngest children of.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Renaissance people, if you are enjoying the Italian Renaissance podcast, I have good news. We're now active on Patreon. You can show your love for the show by becoming a patron and get access to additional resources, information, and artworks. Better yet, those who join the Renaissance Master or Renaissance Patron tier will get access to at least one additional podcast episode each month. My goal is to ensure that the main podcast remains a free, accessible source for everyone. Become a patron today through the link in the show notes to support the continued production of new episodes and help build and maintain this community. The Italian Renaissance shop is now also active on Etsy, linked in the show notes. Sport our logo or choose from a growing selection of Italian art-inspired designs. Discounts are offered to select Patreon tiers as well. Your support has my immortal gratitude. Now, enjoy the show. Ludovico and Barbara, and then behind her is Gianfrancesco, one of their sons, and you might even have off to the right identified as with his hand on his hip, the dagger at his side, Ridolfo, the blonde man who's sort of looking off, not central in the composition, but to the right-hand side of it. And you have the very, very famous portrait of the Gonzaga court dwarf. I use that term only in regard to the time period because that's what they were called, court dwarves. They were unfortunately these sort of accessories to the court. If you look to the right side of Marquess Barbara, you see the dwarf standing there that has a lot of space to herself and a lot of compositional prominence as she stares out at you. She had some favor in the court of the Gonzaga, and this is probably the most famous portrait of a person of small stature from the Renaissance period. And then I talk about this on the Patreon if you guys are members. Underneath the seat of Ludovico Gonzaga has been identified as his favorite dog, Rubino, little Ruby, who was sort of a red-haired hound of some sort, is mentioned in letters, especially when Rubino dies. Ludovico is quite devastated by the loss. We have the favorite dog, the portrait of Rubino, Ludovico Gonzaga's favorite, underneath his seat. So this is not just magnificence and royalty. We get the family, we get other courtiers in the background, we get a moment of the court captured, but we also get the favorite dog, and unfortunately, probably on a very similar social status at the time, the favorite dwarf. I'm not well researched in the status of court dwarves, so maybe that's a rabbit hole for us to jump down another time. That's the north wall. Okay, the west wall shows Ludovico again, but now sometimes they call this the meeting. It's Ludovico and his heir Francesco, who will become the next Marquis of Mantua, with other children of the Gonzaga court. Something very interesting is that Galeazzo Maria Sforza, Duke of Milan, actually complains that he is not included among the courtiers in these frescoes. Not only does he complain that he was not included in them, and he calls it, in fact, a beautifully painted room, he complains that, and that's in this fresco here on the west wall, the meeting, the Emperor Frederick III, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the King of Denmark, King Christian, are included, as in recognized by courtiers who were in this room, who observed these frescoes, recognized the likenesses of the Holy Roman Emperor and of King Christian and of Marquis Ludovico Gonzaga and his heir. And the Duke of Milan, who was an ally of the Gonzaga, was not included, and he complains about this. And Ludovico tries to make amends by saying, well, the likenesses aren't done that well anyway. Right. And this is interesting. What would it mean, Renaissance people, for aristocrats and courtiers of the time to go into this audience chamber to observe Ludovico's message and to not see his ally, the court of Milan, but to see the emperor and the kings of Denmark? It's showing a sense of self-fashioning of power, right? What is Ludovico trying to associate himself with? Not as the condottiere exactly, but as the great power of Gonzaga royalty. Okay. And just to mention aside, we know that on the north wall, Rubino is shown under his seat, but also right behind his leg in this scene, you get this little fuzzy dog that does not look like a hunting dog to me. It looks like a portrait to me. I would be really interested to know if we know who this dog is. Rubino is mentioned by name in the archival documents. I don't know if this little fuzzy guy is. Um, and if you continue along the left, we get actually more hunting dogs that, again, look like portraits. So not just generic dogs hunting, but very specific dogs of the Gonzaga court. And one of them is looking up, his chin turned upward. Really masterful foreshortening. Remember, Mantegna is experimenting quite heavily in foreshortening. That is the how do you explain foreshortening? Foreshortening is when you create like a sense of depth with a figure. It's almost like someone pointing at you directly in a painting. How do you make that arm look proportional even though you don't actually see the arm? You see what I mean? So the dog's sitting with his neck up, looking up at this celebration of putti who are holding up a sign. He's kind of indicating that you should be reading it. And then you get a horse portrait of very high pedigree who is off to the left, also foreshortened partially diagonally. This is technical innovation and masterpiece by Mantegna. In this period, this degree of skill and talent was still being developed. Mantegna is a forerunner of expertise, foreshortening, and he does it in these frescoes. And that is not all he does in these frescoes with foreshortening. We are about to see what is probably the most magnificent uh, technical innovation of Mantegna, and that is the vaulted ceiling in the Camera Picta. What do we have? Roundels with gold and not fake, faux marble painted of Roman emperors. So now the Gonzaga court is associating themselves with an imperial Roman past. But then you have an oculus, which is right out of the Pantheon. That is a hole directly in the ceiling that allows light in, but this is completely painted. It's not a real oculus, as you'll look. It's Renaissance painting that pretends to let the sky in, but it's got a balcony on it. And this is a type of painting called di sotto in su, from below to above, di sotto in su. So you're from below, you're looking up, and it's made to make the impression that you are looking through an oculus. Masterfully done, but here's the thing, Renaissance people. This is not just a technical masterpiece. It is a joke. It's a funny situation because if you are a noble and an aristocrat, and you walk into the Camera Picta and you look around at the Gonzaga magnificence and you notice the gold and you notice the emperors, and then you look up through this oculus, what do you see? Sneering, snickering courtiers looking down at you like you are being watched. And they're sort of like, hee, like, oh, we're looking down and we see you. And not only are they snickering, very interesting. This is a thing that you often get in Mantegna's paintings. You get a representation of a black African who is also part of the court. So it's speaking to the plurality of the Gonzaga court. And they are among putti, these little cherubs who are doing mischievous things, right? The banister that they are leaning over, looking down on you on, is full of holes, and they're sticking their head through the holes, and one even has his head stuck, and he's like screaming for help. And then you have others that are on the outside of the banister, kind of their toes sticking over. They look like they're about to, honestly, like they're about to take a leak on you, right? They're about to pee on you or something. One's butt is facing you, but you're looking directly up, so they're perfectly foreshortened to look like di sotto in su, from above looking up. And you get this fat little cherub butt and his butt crack and his fat little leg rolls. And you get these screaming ones, a bird, just like a peacock. And not only that, there is a giant plant in a pot that is partially hanging over with a little piece of flimsy wood stopping it from falling over. Like this giant heavy piece of pottery and dirt is about to fall on your head. It's all whimsical and it's all funny. And what it does is it takes away the sort of sharpness of court scene that you're looking at. But most importantly, this is the most important technical innovation of the camera picta, the di sotto in su view of an oculus with perfectly foreshortened figures and putti and mischief and whimsicalness and fun that is characteristic of Mantegna's work here in the Camera degli Sposi. Ultimately, this room is not just a mere series of courtly portraits, but both an exertion of Ludovico's power and prestige, but also a major triumph of Renaissance art that enables the legibility of that prestige. Ludovico has distanced himself from Milan to associate among emperors and kings, yet he always remains the vigilant condottiere, that military leader, who can be relied upon and trusted with military matters as he's being handed this concerning note, right? Meanwhile, you can engage this reading and laugh at the same time. The mischievous antics of the court happening above you through the oculus. It's not all prim and proper, right? The Camera Picta is a place you can but instead offers a bit of give and take, of play with power. But you get the pets and you get the putti, but you're still in this sort of imperial setting with the Roman emperors. It's all very clever. And the Camera Picta is a place that you can visit today in Mantua, and they still maintain some of their vibrancy after all of these years. Ludovico Gonzaga died in 1478, and his son Federico I would rule as Marquis, maintaining Mantegna's employment in the Gonzaga court. Renaissance people, we have more to say about Andrea Mantegna in the coming episodes, the Gonzaga court, and Isabella d'Este. So stay tuned. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, arrivederci.